Everyone says Americans don't want small cars. That's the myth. The truth is stranger. We still make brilliant little runabouts. The companies just don't bring them here. The Honda Fit? It didn't die. It emigrated. It's still sold abroad as the Jazz while the US lineup moved up a size class. But this didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't just one villain. Once upon a not-so-distant time, economy wasn't a punishment. It was a puzzle well solved. The best small cars weren't shrunken copies of big sedans. They were species evolved for city life. Short wheelbases turned 90-degree corners into playthings. Tall roofs and low floors created TARDIS interiors. Tiny outside, bigger than expected inside. Seats folded into improbable shapes. Cargo bays became mini caverns. A Civic, a Corolla, a Golf. Names that carried the promise of honest value were built to be light, durable, and weirdly fun. You didn't buy one and apologize for it. You bought one and found reasons to drive. What stands out from that era isn't nostalgia, it's competition. There were so many contenders that value became an arms race. One brand offered an extra cubby, another shaved weight and sharpened the steering. If you wanted basic transport, dealers had a menu of legit choices under a number that felt reachable to a new grad, a young family, or anyone determined to keep their budget sane. Hot versions existed, CRS, GTI, 205 GTI, with more power and swagger. But the base cars never felt like punishment. They were humble instruments that played a happy tune. That ecosystem did two things. It kept prices honest, and it kept expectations realistic. A cheap car could be a good car because it was engineered to be cheap without being cynical. It wasn't a decontented luxury model, it was a brilliant little tool. The result was a kind of democracy on wheels. You could walk into a showroom with a modest paycheck and walk out with something you trusted, enjoyed, and could maintain with normal tools. That's not the past talking, that's the formula that worked. So why did the formula that delighted millions stop being the default? Follow the money. The truth is not complicated. Bigger vehicles make bigger profits. When automakers realized a lightly dressed truck could be sold as a family vehicle with leather seats and a lifestyle brochure, everything changed. You could spend roughly the same to build a compact hatch or a small crossover, but sell the latter for thousands more. On paper, the decision looked obvious. On the ground, dealers saw an even sweeter picture. Higher sticker, richer financing, more add-ons, more commission. Multiply that transaction by tens of thousands, and the market tilts. This wasn't purely greed, it was survival strategy in an industry with brutal cycles. If your competitor leans hard into crossovers and posts better margins, you either follow or explain those numbers to shareholders. So base hatchbacks got treated like awkward relatives, kept around for compliance and marketing, but never front and center. Inventory managers ordered the trims that made sense for the balance sheet, which meant the cheapest small car was often the one you couldn't actually find. The car you could test drive right now? Taller, pricier, and promoted like it's exactly what you asked for. Brand image played a supporting role. Enticing buyers with a $15K special may put feet through the door, but it anchors the brand in budget when the boardroom wants premium. The same badge that once bragged about frugality now whispers about sophistication. Suddenly, the car that built the brand's reputation is the car that doesn't fit the brochure. It didn't matter that the small car solved real problems beautifully. The crossover solved a different problem for the company, profit variability, and that problem won. But profits weren't the only invisible lever. The rulebook itself started favoring size in quiet, technical ways most drivers never hear about. Here's the part that sounds upside down at first. Fuel economy and emissions rules didn't just chase higher miles per gallon. They also linked targets to vehicle footprint, the rectangle your tires draw on the ground. The larger that rectangle, the more forgiving the target. The idea was to let manufacturers build a mix of vehicles without punishing work trucks or family haulers. The side effect? It took pressure off selling lots of tiny cars to raise a fleet average. If a company could meet its curve by optimizing bigger models, the urgent business case for a $17K hatchback softened. This isn't a conspiracy, it's an unintended consequence. Attribute-based rules were designed to be fair, and they are, in a spreadsheet. In a showroom, fairness becomes momentum. Engineering teams can spend their time making larger vehicles meet achievable targets while marketing leans into trends that already favor height and presence. Meanwhile, the humble hatch carries the same regulatory overhead as anything else: testing, certification, compliance paperwork. If it doesn't shoulder enough volume to justify that fixed cost, it becomes a boardroom rounding error waiting to be cut. Add in the complexity of global standards, different crash rules, different pedestrian protection requirements, different lighting regulations, and the cost of federalizing a small car for the US can outstrip the profit it would ever earn. Other regions tax engine size or vehicle weight, reward efficiency at the pump, and design cities around compact footprints. They create a runway for small cars to thrive. America, by accident rather than design, built a runway for bigger shapes to keep taking off. And then there's safety. Not the fear-mongering kind, the real life-saving kind that also quietly raised the bar for how cheap could be. Safety tech has saved lives, full stop. Front airbags, side curtains, electronic stability control, rear-view cameras, reinforced structures. These advances transformed survivability in crashes and reduced the margin for human error. But every new system adds cost, complexity, and often weight. A light hatch engineered in the 1990s could meet simpler standards with simpler solutions. The 21st century version must integrate sensors, software, airbags everywhere, stronger pillars, and carefully engineered crumple zones. None of that is bad, it's just not free. When you're trying to hit a starter price, these are stubborn fixed costs. There's a visual effect too. As more tall vehicles filled the road, the baseline changed. Sitting low began to feel unsafe, even when the actual crash ratings for small cars were solid. A sea of hoods at chest height creates a perception gap. Towering vehicles look protective, so people equate height with safety. Research has raised concerns about taller, blunter front ends and pedestrian risk, but those nuances don't show up in a driveway decision. What you see is your child's car seat riding high in a big cabin. What you feel is reassurance. Design trends were touched by regulations overseas as well. Pedestrian protection pushes for energy-absorbing space between a hood and hard engine bits, which often encourages taller front styling. The small cars that remain have grown wider, taller, heavier, and pricier compared with their ancestors. Again, none of this is malicious. It's the standard cocktail of progress. Every ingredient good in isolation, the mix expensive by the end. And when the cost to build a compliant hatch begins to overlap with a small crossover you can sell for thousands more, the business case stops penciling. Even if you beat all those costs, there's one last trap waiting at the desk where the pen meets the paper. Walk into a dealership today and the conversation rarely starts with total price. It starts with a number that rules all numbers, the monthly payment. The spreadsheet behind that number is elastic. Stretch the term from 48 to 72 months, tweak the money factor on the lease, roll in fees, tack on a warranty, and the delta between a base hatch and a small crossover shrinks to a line item that sounds harmless. For about $40 more a month, you can step up. $40 for more space. $40 for a taller view, $40 for resale. In the moment, it feels like prudence. But the math you feel and the math you live are not the same. That $40 becomes thousands over time, plus insurance bumps, plus tires that cost more, plus features you didn't need but will eventually have to repair. The buyer who came in to spend less ends up spending more for longer, locked to a payment that crowds out other goals. This isn't a moral failing, it's a system optimized to sell a specific outcome. And when inventory favors higher trims and larger shapes, the easiest car to drive home today is rarely the truly inexpensive one. The culture shifted with the financing. In the 1990s, people still bought small cars outright or with short loans because prices made that realistic. As terms stretched and 0% offers flooded ads, the psychology flipped. Can I afford the payment? Replaced, can I afford the car? It doesn't take many cycles of that logic to reset a market. By the time the habit is widespread, the entry-level hatch's strongest weapon, cash simplicity, no longer wins. It's an elegant trick. The budget car lost its power not because it failed, but because a larger, pricier option was engineered to feel just as affordable. Meanwhile, beyond our borders, the tiny heroes kept doing their jobs, humming through narrow lanes and busy markets with the confidence of ideas that still make sense. Travel, and you see them everywhere. Little cars purpose-built for cities that were old when your great-grandparents were young. Short, square hatches with big glass and upright seating. Compact wagons that carry a family and a week's worth of life without feeling like a fortress. Manuals are common. Engines are sensible. Ownership feels like a partnership, not a subscription. In Europe, Asia, and South America, these cars aren't weird. They're normal. They're sized for dense neighborhoods, taxed in ways that favor restraint, and celebrated by drivers who value the freedom of fitting anywhere. Some of the nameplates are ones we miss. The Fit lives on as the Jazz. The Polo is still a benchmark for tidy packaging. The Swift stays playful. The Mazda 2 stays honest. When these cars do gain a bit of height, they turn into micro crossovers that still weigh less than a full trunk of American expectations. They often cost a lot less too because the market supports them. Fuel prices encourage frugality, parking scarcity rewards small footprints, and policy nudges aim buyers toward efficiency rather than presence. Here the door remains mostly closed. The reasons are a collage of cost, regulation, marketing, and geopolitics. Bringing a low-margin small car into the U.S. means re-engineering, testing, and certifying it for a sprawling country that rewards size in subtle ways. The math rarely works. Even the electric side of the story is ironic. Ultra-cheap city EVs thrive abroad, but tariffs, sourcing rules, and incentive structures limit what arrives with a friendly price tag. So we look at photos of $10K runabouts overseas and wonder why affordable at home starts with a 2. It's not that we don't like small cars, it's that our system keeps making them someone else's normal. If that's the present, is there any signal of a different future? The early answers are messy, but interesting. Every time prices spike and insurance climbs, a countercurrent appears. People start asking whether they really need a rolling living room to commute alone. They open old classifieds and rediscover 1990s civility. Thin pillars, light steering, cheap tires, manual windows that never fail. That nostalgia isn't just vibe, it's budget math. And as more buyers hit the wall on $700 plus payments, the appetite for leaner machines grows. You can feel a cultural itch for simplicity. Fewer screens, fewer sensors, fewer subscriptions attached to a key. A few startups smell the opportunity. The pitch: build vehicles that are intentionally modest. Keep the footprint small. Skip the 10 cameras. Let the windows wind by hand. Aim the price at people who want to own, not impress. The details differ. Some chase modular layouts, some chase minimal EVs, some chase tiny pickups with practical beds, but the thesis is the same. The future doesn't have to be bloat. The challenge is brutal. Modern safety and compliance aren't optional. Batteries aren't cheap. Supply chains don't bend overnight. And under $20K almost always requires incentives that can move like the weather. So what would it take for small and affordable to stage a real comeback? 3 levers matter. First, policy. If rules rewarded efficiency without indirectly favoring size, the business case for compact hatches would brighten. If insurance aligned to lower risk rather than higher replacement cost, ownership math would soften. Second, product. A manufacturer has to commit to the idea that a simple, cleverly packaged car can be desirable without being dressed like a luxury item. That means honest materials, smart ergonomics, and delightful details that don't cost a fortune. Third, distribution. Dealers have to stock and sell these cars like they mean it, not bury them behind a wall of tall metal. There's also a storytelling shift waiting to happen. For a decade, marketing told us we needed more. More height, more screen, more capability than we would ever use. The next campaign can tell a different truth. Freedom is fitting anywhere. Freedom is parking on the block you actually live on. Freedom is paying off a car in 3 years, not 7. Freedom is buying tires that don't wince your credit card. Small can be premium, not in price, but in thoughtfulness. A car that wastes nothing can feel like luxury for the mind. If that feels naive, consider how quickly tastes have flipped before. Minivans were kings, then punchlines, then quietly perfect again. Sedans were default, then endangered, then suddenly stylish in niche form. We aren't trapped in one timeline. When costs change and streets fill back up, priorities rearrange themselves. Cities are already nudging people toward shapes that play nicely with other humans. Younger buyers care less about brand pecking order and more about debt load. And somewhere out there is a product team itching to ship a small car that feels like a rebellious choice in a world of sameness. Here's the closing twist. The small, affordable car never had to be the hero of everyone's story. It only needed to be available for the people whose lives it fits. The teacher who parallel parks between delivery vans every morning, the barista who refuses to sign up for a 7-year loan, the retiree who wants to keep driving without feeding an SUV's appetite. Give those people a tool that respects their intelligence and their wallet, and they'll do the marketing for you. They always did. So who killed the small car? Nobody and everybody. 1,000 nudges in one direction until the path looked inevitable. But inevitability is just momentum. Nudge the other way. On policy, on product, on story, and watch how fast normal can change. Don't be surprised when a tidy hatch becomes the coolest thing on your block again. Not because it screams, but because it quietly does everything you actually need. In a world obsessed with more, the bravest move might be less. And if that sounds like a revolution, maybe that's because it is one we've seen before. The small car didn't die. It was priced out, crowded out, and talked out of the room. Give it a fair room again, and it will do what it's always done. Make life simpler, cheaper, lighter, and, yes, more fun.